stay.
You gentlemen are about to undergo an experiment that will benefit the soldiers of the Soviet Union. You will be given a gas that our nation's leading scientists have been working on. All we know is that it is not lethal, and you will be in no physical harm throughout the duration of the experiment. Sleep experiment, June 14th, 1945, and log.
In the midst of 1945, during World War II, the Soviet Union was experimenting on making a new type of gas drug which allowed people to stay awake for long periods of time. But along with this new invention came a lot of backlash and horror, from the experimentees almost eating each other and themselves alive. You may ask why and how it was able to be pulled off, and how it made the brain go against its former self. In today's video, we explore the story and the horror that is claimed alongside. Now, we all know that sleep is a vital requirement for us all. We also know the side effects of going without sleep for a few days. But what would happen if someone went without sleep for a whole month? No, we're not talking about sleeping for 2 or 3 hours a day. We're talking about remaining wide awake for a whole month. Any sane person would have the same response. It isn't possible. Or was it? The Soviet Union was on a mission to be able to have one of the strongest armies known at that time, so for them it was anything they could do to achieve it. One of the things thought about while in the process was making a gas which allowed people to stay awake for long periods of time, which obviously allowed the soldiers to fight for longer periods of time without getting mentally and physically drained. In the Second World War, the German army had their own version of some stimulant, which was revealed to be a highly used drug called Pervitin, which is commonly known from resources as a nerve system stimulant. But the Soviet army wanted to boost the standards. This is why they came up with their own source of gas-like drug, which was claimed to keep the soldiers awake for over 15 days to a month, as they described anyways. But as a start boost, they needed to test it out on real humans. You may be asking, who would want to test themselves on this new dodgy gas drug where you could probably get yourself killed in an instant? Don't worry, they had plenty of people to mind. Political prisoners of war was an obvious choice for them, with the promise to them, if you make 30 days without sleep, you can be freed. With 5 test subjects ready and a new isolation block, compacted with a toilet, running water and food to last them the whole month. The sealed environment allowed the gas to release in small quantities, with the oxygen level still being at a rate where the men can survive. There was cameras and microphones equipped to monitor every movement, but maybe this was not to the highest standards as well this was the 1940s. Everything seemed to be going well for the first few days. No signs of odd behaviour or moods throughout, until day number 4, when the inmates decided to discuss their stories from the past, mainly from the war, and the horrors that they witnessed throughout. Things progressed even worse by day 5. Many of the inmates had a sign of psychosis and imagining things that were not there. They start to become paranoid of each other and start whispering and talking to the microphones, discussing very weird and creepy things. From around day 5 about sleep, the mind starts to turn on a person with illusions coming out as real experiences. The scientists wondered if this was from the lack of sleep or the gas working at its fullest. This turned out to be the gas, as by day 9, a man started heavily and loudly screaming all around the room for hours upon end. He screamed so much that he ripped his vocal cords in half until no sound was heard.
Hans has been screaming for the past 7 hours. What seems strange is that the other men have not reacted in any way. Hans has been screaming now for the past 12 hours. His screams have been replaced with a faint whimper. It Seems he has permanently destroyed his vocal cords.
After a couple more days of being in the isolation block, it became into a sudden silence, with no one being able to be seen from the CCTV cameras, which was odd because there was no initial way they could have escaped, and the oxygen level suggested that they were still alive. They had no other choice than going into the test block to see what was going on. They made a harsh and turn requirement to the inmates stating, "We are coming in the room, lay on the floor with your hands out or you will be shot. If you comply with our orders, one of you can have immediate freedom." With one of the inmates replying, "We no longer want to be free." Obviously the drug gas got to them so much that they couldn't survive without it, maybe changing the way they physically live. The thing they heard next after initially taking the gas off was the men screaming in pain and urgent saying, "We want the gas, we want the gas." Without any real realisation, they began to enter the room with caution, unveiling the true horror which they have not experienced before. Blood and flesh was smothered all across the walls and floor. One man was dead, with his organs ripped out of him and placed onto the floor like some piece of artwork. They had skin and flesh removed from themselves, which was later to be discovered that they had done this themselves. One man had taken so much skin and flesh off himself that it was revealed you could see into his ribcage. After the sudden realisation, they thought it would be the best idea for them to leave, while they still screamed in desperation for this gas. A few minutes after the discovery, soldiers were called in to remove the subjects, which ended in almost all the soldiers being killed, or them taking their own lives some days after the event, with one of the soldiers' throats being ripped out. One of the inmates was bleeding to death while screaming, "We want the gas," and the doctor who initially ran the experiment had now broken many bones. This photo shown on the screen right now was used to represent the horrific faces and conditions of the men when they opened the block door. Almost all the inmates died, as one man was revealed to have 9 broken bones and muscles torn all over his body. One man that was strapped to a chair with restraints quickly died off all of a sudden. They tried to patch up one guy with minimal cuts and bruises until his brain went into shock and unfortunately died. Now, as an average person reading this story and how it progressed, you may be thinking, well, it's most probably a fiction, right? And the simple answer to that is probably yes, as there is no scientific evidence that this did occur, but some facts and resources and maybe representing a thing similar to this happening in the past. Let's investigate that. Now, first of all, from my point of view, this is just a made-up fiction, as the only real resource for the story is on a fictional horror website, as this story is very similar and has been written on the same website as other fictional horrors like The Rake and Slender Man. But when it first appeared on the internet, it instantly went viral, and people started to debate the authenticity of the story. The debate still continues to this day. Part of the reason why it's so believable, as the military in the Soviet era was known to be inhumane and conducted various experiments in secret. The Soviet Union was indeed behind a number of the scientific experiments, beginning from the 1900s and continuing until the Soviet broke apart in late 1980s. Most of these experiments were conducted by the Soviet Secret Services, an intelligent branch of Soviet military. Not only was they known to be brutal, but they also never hesitated from conducting human experimentation, way beyond what the US and North Korea could ever imagine, was conducted by these services. One of the most infamous scientific experiments by the Soviet Secret Services was the Poison Laboratory. The purpose of this facility was to test various kinds of poisons, developed in the intention of attacking the West. It is believed that the laboratory was activated again in 1991, and is still used to create deadly poisonous biological weapons for secret operations in the West. Most of the victims died instantly. Some of the poison tested were mustard gas, digitoxin, ricin, and cyanide. The laboratory was also used for a place where they could keep enemies of the Russian state, and was known to be executed with these deadly poisons. But obviously this has nothing to do with the Russian sleep experiment, or how bad it exhaled anyways. But it shows a point that things similar to this was an occurrence. But obviously the main fact of this story was not true, mainly supported by the first fact that you can't just live in the conditions the inmates were in. Those men would have died instantly from shock or blood loss, and they was left for long periods of time before the soldiers finally decided to show up. And my second reason is that there's no scientific gas which can keep you awake for over 15 days, or as I know anyways. So you may be wondering, if the experiment was not true, then where did all these photos and archives used in the video come from? Well, my first estimate from the main subject photo, which is a man with unsettling sunken eyes and a grin. This photo was used to give a real life visualization of the men before they died at the end of the experiment. At first glance, I knew it wouldn't have been real. I estimated at first that it was some type of special effect or movie prop, which I later found out was half correct. From further research, if you get rid of the black and white filter and zoom out a bit, it is revealed to be a Halloween decoration which you can actually purchase. So if you want this in your house, then I guess go for it. So for the second photo with the men with gas masks, this one was pretty self-explanatory. After further research, it was a photo representing the different types of gas masks which was used in World War I, one being the British, German, US and French, and this photo was originally took in 1917, as this story was set in mid-1945. Only the origin for this photo was cut off when the story was implied. Unfortunately, there's not too much evidence towards the story suggesting its true existence, which was highly doubtful in the first place as the reasons discussed. If you have any other stories, true or fictional, you'd like me to cover, then make sure to let me know in the comments down below. The Russian sleep experiment is still one of the most highly read horror tales of the century, and you never know what it'll bring on next.